Welcome to another episode of real-life haunted stories. If you love chilling tales and spine-tingling horror stories, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Turn on the notification bell so you never miss a scare. New nightmares drop every week. Stay haunted. So, let's start our today's episode. Story 1. The Cursed Tombstone. Sarah and her friends, curious about an ancient, abandoned graveyard on the outskirts of town, decide to explore it on a dark, foggy evening. Local legends speak of a cursed tombstone, a large, imposing marker in the center of the cemetery that was said to belong to a witch who had died centuries ago. The locals had warned Sarah's group to stay away, claiming that the witch's spirit still haunted the graveyard, but their fascination led them there anyway. As they explored the eerie grounds, they felt a strange, almost oppressive presence in the air. The stone was impossibly old, its surface eroded by time and weather, yet there was something unnervingly vivid about the engravings on the tombstone. Sarah, unable to resist, traced her fingers over the markings and unknowingly activated a dormant curse. From that moment on, her friends began to vanish one by one, their bodies found in various graves, their faces frozen in terror. Every time Sarah tried to leave, the path seemed to change, twisting back toward the cursed tombstone. The more she tried to flee, the more it felt like the graveyard itself was closing in around her, feeding off her fear. As night deepened, Sarah uncovered an ancient journal hidden within a nearby crypt, revealing that the witch had cursed the stone to trap anyone who dared disturb her grave for eternity. The only way to break the curse was to sacrifice something personal, something that would be willingly given up. But time was running out, as the graveyard's inhabitants grew restless, pulling Sarah toward her inevitable fate. Story 2. The Forgotten Ones. Jared, a seasoned grave digger, took a job at an old cemetery that had long been abandoned by the community. It had been neglected for years, with weeds growing thick around cracked headstones, and the entire area exuding an eerie, forgotten aura. The cemetery was known to be the final resting place of many unknown souls who had been buried there when the town had been much smaller. Jared had no fear of the dark, having worked in similar environments for years, but there was something off about this place. One evening, while digging near an ancient, moss-covered grave, he noticed something odd. The ground felt colder than usual, and as he dug deeper, the earth seemed unnaturally hard. When his shovel finally hit something solid, he unearthed a stone slab with no name. As he removed the slab, he found an empty coffin that seemed to have been untouched for centuries. However, the coffin wasn't completely empty. Inside, there was a strange symbol drawn in dried blood on the inside of the lid. When Jared touched it, the air turned ice-cold, and the silence of the graveyard was shattered by a deep, hollow voice that seemed to emanate from the earth itself. The voice urged Jared to leave the grave alone, warning him that the forgotten souls of the cemetery had been awakened. Over the next few days, the graveyard came to life in a terrifying way. Jared began to see figures lurking among the headstones at night, figures that seemed to be people from the past, with hollow eyes and ghostly forms. The spirits wanted something from him, something that could never be given back. As they surrounded him, pleading in whispers, Jared realized that the forgotten souls had been trapped in the graveyard, cursed to wander without rest. He discovered the only way to free them was to destroy the tombstone and the symbol, but doing so would unleash something far worse, an ancient being buried long ago who had kept the souls in prison. Story 3. The Weeping Widow. When Thomas inherited his late grandmother's house, he also inherited the plot of land that came with it, a secluded graveyard at the edge of her property. The graveyard, small and overgrown, had not been visited for decades, save for a few maintenance visits. But when Thomas decided to clear the land and restore the graves, he discovered something disturbing, a marble statue of a widow, her eyes perpetually weeping. The sight of her sad, sorrowful expression chilled him to the bone, and soon, he began having vivid dreams of the widow calling out to him in a haunting, sorrowful voice. Late one night, Thomas visited the graveyard to inspect the statue. As he approached, he heard the unmistakable sound of crying, a soft, forlorn wail. At first, he thought it was just the wind, but as he drew closer, the weeping grew louder and more anguished. He reached out to touch the statue, and as his hand made contact, the stone turned warm and soft beneath his fingers. The weeping woman's eyes suddenly opened, and Thomas recoiled in horror as the widow's spirit emerged from the statue, her face twisted in an eternal expression of grief and longing. She began to recount her tragic story. She had been a widow in life, mourning the loss of her husband who had been buried in the very graveyard Thomas now owned. However, as the years passed, the widow's grief consumed her, and in her despair, she performed dark rituals to try to bring him back from the dead. Her failure cursed both her and her husband, binding their spirits to the graveyard. Her sorrow became an unrelenting force, seeking someone to help her, but also to trap others in the same eternal torment. Desperate to escape, Thomas tried to leave, but he found that the paths in the graveyard had changed, and the fog grew thick around him. He realized the widow's curse had already claimed him, and now he too was part of the graveyard's sorrowful haunt. As he turned to face the weeping figure one last time, he saw the faint outlines of other souls, doomed to walk the graveyard for all eternity. Story 4. The Hollow Ground. In a small, isolated town, a new cemetery had been established to accommodate the growing population. However, as the years passed, strange things began happening around the graveyard. Pets and livestock disappeared without a trace, and residents reported hearing strange noises at night. Screams, scratching sounds, and even whispers coming from the earth itself. The town's elders, fearing the worst, began to investigate. One evening, a young man named Peter, seeking answers for his own family's strange experiences, ventured into the cemetery alone. The night was silent, save for the occasional rustle of wind. As he explored the darkened rows of gravestones, he noticed something unsettling. The ground beneath his feet seemed hollow. Every step he took sounded different, echoing in a way that was unnatural. He knelt to examine a nearby grave, its headstone crumbling and unreadable, and discovered a set of strange markings carved into the dirt itself. They were symbols of an ancient burial ritual, one that involved the ritualistic burial of the living, not the dead. Peter realized that the cemetery had been built on top of an ancient burial ground, one where the dead had not rested peacefully. The hollow ground beneath his feet was filled with the spirits of those who had been wrongly buried alive, their cries forever imprinted on the earth. As he tried to flee, the ground beneath him began to shift, and spectral hands reached up from the soil, dragging him into the depths. The spirits of the living dead sought vengeance on anyone who dared walk their cursed grounds, and Peter's fate was sealed as the ground consumed him. Story 5. The Graves of the Forgotten. Alex, a young historian obsessed with uncovering forgotten stories, came across an old cemetery deep in the woods while researching the area's colonial history. The graveyard was well hidden, almost forgotten by time itself, and the few headstones that remained were weathered and illegible. Intrigued, Alex returned to the cemetery several times to study the graves, uncovering bits and pieces of the town's early history. One day, while digging near a particularly old tombstone, Alex unearthed an ancient, dust-covered journal. It was written by a woman named Eleanor, who had lived in the town centuries ago. Her story recounted strange happenings in the town, villagers disappearing, children being abducted by shadowy figures, and a deep sense of dread that lingered in the air. The journal detailed a dark pact made by the town's founders with an otherworldly force that resided in the graveyard. The pact required the sacrifice of the innocent, and those who died were buried with the promise that their souls would serve the entity forever. As Alex delved deeper into the journal, the ground around the graves began to stir. The spirits of the forgotten villagers, those who had been sacrificed, began to rise from the earth. They sought revenge on those who had uncovered their secrets, cursing anyone who dared disturb their eternal rest. Alex tried to escape, but the graveyard's boundaries had shifted, trapping him in a maze of twisted, skeletal figures. The more Alex tried to flee, the more the cemetery seemed to warp and bend, pulling him closer to the heart of the forgotten graves, where the dark entity still lurked. These stories dive deeper into the malevolent forces, ancient curses, and terrifying consequences that await those who dare disturb the peace of the dead in a graveyard. Each narrative builds suspense, terror, and a sense of impending doom as characters uncover hidden secrets that unleash horrifying forces. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to like to show your support, comment to share your thoughts or ask questions, and don't forget to subscribe to stay updated with our latest content. Hit the notification bell so you never miss an upload.